everyone, it's Robyn, coming to you from 14 Weeks in Quarantine, which is about how long it took me to get bored and think up a YouTube series about baking. While we're waiting for the Defy Gravity studio to reopen, I've been thinking about what kind of stuff I could talk about online that you all would find interesting, and I've landed on bread. I'm going to be making a bunch of videos about baking bread, sourdough, traditional yeast, and pretty much any other stuff that you would find interesting. I'll be posting these videos in the DG Facebook page, which is where you want to go to see all the other cool stuff that our community is up to while we're waiting for the studio to open. So I am still figuring out the technical aspects of how to put this all together. So for this video, I'm just going to introduce you to the project and give a quick explanation about how a sourdough starter works. So a sourdough starter, got mine right here, is a collection of, or a mixture of flour and water that attracts wild yeast that lives kind of everywhere in the air and ferments. And as it ferments, it rises, and that's how it works like commercial yeast to bake bread. Start it by just mixing up some all-purpose flour and water, letting it sit, putting some of that mixture in a new flour-water mixture, and keeping that going. As you keep letting it ferment, those yeasts are going to build up and it'll get strong enough in order to bake with. So this is my sourdough starter. She is called Audrey 2 for you Little Shop of Horror fans. It's been about 24 hours since I fed her last. If you can see, she's super runny, pretty much like pancake batter. She's got a lot of little bubbles and she smells pretty sour and strong. So if I were to bake with this, it wouldn't work because the yeast has been in there for too long. It's eaten up all of the protein and sugar that's in the flour, so it doesn't have any kind of rising power left to make bread rise. So if I want to bake bread with this, I need to feed it again, let it sit for not as long, it's going to rise up, and then I can use it in place of commercial yeast. So to feed sourdough starter, I'm going to get a clean bowl. You can use ceramic or glass. You don't want to use metal when you're mixing up sourdough starter because the chemicals in metal can react with yeast and that can impact how well it rises. I'm going to use, you can see, a digital scale to measure my starter flour and water. You can do this by volume. If I'm feeding by volume measurements, it's about a half a cup of starter flour and water. The reason you want to use a scale is that with baking, you want very precise measurements, pretty much down to the gram, and it's hard to be that accurate when you're just eyeballing how much is in a measuring cup. So for baking bread especially, I very much recommend investing in a good digital scale. It's going to make this whole process a lot more straightforward. So I've got my starter. I'm measuring about 114 grams. That is about half a cup. Doesn't matter how much you use. 114 grams is a good amount to make enough that you can bake with, but it's not so much that it's going to rise up out of the bowl and go everywhere. If you're doing a recipe that calls for a lot more starter, then when you're feeding it, you'll just use more. You can use as much as you need as long as you've got that equal proportion of starter, flour, and water. So I've got 114 grams of my starter. Going to add the same amount of water. A little bit too much there. There. 114. Go ahead and mix that in. And then I'm going to add 114 grams of all-purpose flour. You generally want to use all-purpose unbleached flour in your sourdough starter. That is kind of the standard. When you're getting one started, it can be helpful to use some whole grain flours, whole wheat flour, rye flour, spelt flour, because whole grain flour has a bit more protein and sugars and just kind of nutritional stuff in it than a flour that's been processed. So that can be useful to help get your yeasts going and active. But for the right texture in most types of bread, you're going to want one that's just all-purpose flour. And then if you're doing whole wheat baking, you would add that flour when you're putting the bread dough together. So I've got water, flour, and starter. I'm going to mix that up. Make sure that you're getting the flour all the way mixed in to the starter. You don't want to have any clumps of dry ingredients in here so that it's all fermenting evenly. Once that's all come together, I like to just give it a quick scrape down with a spatula so that it's not coming up on the sides of the bowl and I don't get kind of crusty bits drying on the edges. All right, that's all set. My starter is fed. If you can see here, it's a lot thicker now. No bubbles, doesn't smell very strong. And for it to be used in baking, I'm gonna cover it up and let it sit for about 4 to 6 hours until it rises up. It's gonna rise and get bubbly, coming up pretty much almost to the edge of the bowl here. One nice way to check if your starter is ready to go is to have it in a glass crock. Mark the height it comes up to when you've just fed it, and then when it's about at double that, that's when it is ready to be used. You can also, when you're ready to bake, test a little piece of your starter. If you put it into a glass of lukewarm water, it should float. If it sinks down, you know it needs to ferment a little longer. It needs a little longer for the yeast to get active. I'm going to cover that up, set it aside, and in about 4 to 6 hours, it'll be ready for me to do something with it. So that is sourdough starter. If you're interested in starting your own, King Arthur Flour has a really good intro and kind of troubleshooting guide to getting it started. I'll put a link to that in the description so you can check that out. And yeah, that's pretty much everything I want to talk about today. I have planned a couple different baking projects I'm going to do next. I'll let you guess what the next one's going to be. And if there is stuff you're interested in seeing, you can comment here. You can talk to me on Defy's Facebook group. I'm happy to make whatever stuff y'all are interested in. So if you've watched this far, thank you. And yeah, I'll see you in future videos. I am also teaching an online flexibility class. If you check out the Defy Gravity Facebook group, there's a link to the calendar that has those classes and other stuff that our instructors are doing while we're waiting for the studio to open up. So please check that out. These videos are all going to be free. But I am accepting donations to Defy Gravity to help with our reopen if that is something you want to do. And I'll have links to our PayPal account in the description for this video. Thanks so much for watching. I hope that you're all doing well. Looking forward to baking. If you're following along with this as I'm doing stuff, I would love to see pictures of stuff you're baking. Hit me up in the Facebook group, on Instagram, however you want to get in touch. Thanks so much. Take care of yourself, and I think you're great.